Well, we're here today in the Judaica Suite at the University of Florida, and we're interviewing Dr. Edwin Safer, and he is joined here as well by his cousin, Stacey Goldring. Dr. Safer, can you tell us what your full name is?
Edwin David Safer.
And when and where were you born?
June 28, 1929, in Orlando, Florida.
Orlando, Florida. How did your family come to live in Florida?
Well, because my grandfather came to Florida. He immigrated. He was actually selected by the Jewish congregation in Jacksonville to be the spiritual leader for the city. Historically, the Jewish community of Jacksonville originally was an Orthodox community till about 1870, and that's when the Reform movement became very popular. And the East Europeans that lived in Jacksonville at the time were kind of disenfranchised. They virtually had to leave the temple and start their own congregation. About 1900, they decided they had enough members from Eastern Europe or all over to start an Orthodox congregation. So they contacted my great-grandfather, and at the time he was about 60, 61 or something. And his comment that he wasn't interested in moving. He said, first of all, the United States was too goyish for him, and he would not bring him and his wife to there. But he had a son that would be interested. And so my grandfather was selected in sight unseen, strictly by mail. And they picked him as their spiritual leader. So he arrived in New York in 1902, and he spent the summer in New York. In fact, he was a sheikh as well as the Moyle and a Chazan, and he spent the summer in New York because his brothers were living there, and he worked in the Catskills as a sheikh. So he made a few dollars, and then he came to Jacksonville in time for the first holidays in 1902. And then my grandmother, who had already had 4 children, she arrived the next year in 1903, and she joined him here in Jacksonville. And the family grew from that particular point.
Wonderful. You have a very large family now.
Very large.
How many members would you say?
The last count was probably, about 5 or 6 years ago. We kind of gave up on it because we didn't. There was not enough interest really to keep it the records going.
Right.
But at the last count, it was nearly 900, and I'm sure it's exceeded that in the last 10 years.
And this week we'll have +2 because
+2. I'm going to be a great-grandfather Thursday, and 2 young ladies, the princesses. I'm not going to introduce them to Prince George and whoever the second prince is. So we got twins for those 2. I always wanted to be part of the royal family anyway. So,
that's wonderful.
Then you could come too, because you could explain to me what they're saying in England, right?
Do the translation. So you grew up in 1920s, 30s,
I was born
Florida.
in 29, and we lived in Orlando until 37.
What was that like? What are your main memories of
It was great.
Orlando?
It was in the middle of the Depression. Mm-hmm. Nobody really knew you were poor. I mean, everybody was poor, so it really made no difference.
Right.
And as a 2 or 3 year old, I did everything a 2 and 3 year old would do. I stole mail from somebody next door, and they told me I was going to be put in jail, so I gave them the mail back. I dug a tunnel one time with my neighbor, and we had a communication going between the 2 tunnels.
Right.
And I would go to, my dad had the kosher market in Orlando. Mm-hmm. And we were, in fact, it was interesting because at that particular point they were open. They had like a grocery and kosher market.
Right.
So they were open on Saturday. Well, on Saturday I'd go to the store and they put me in the movie. And it was on Church Street in Orlando, and they put me in there. And I'd spend the whole day, I'd see maybe 2 or 3 movies, so by the time I came, I could tell my folks exactly the whole script, because it was always a cowboy movie and a serial and cartoons and previews.
Right.
And at one time, I think it was about 1933, they had a beauty contest, and I won. I was, there was a child actor by the name of Dickie Moore. Nobody ever knew of Dickie Moore, and there was a female actress named Deanna Durbin, but Dickie Moore was the male. So I was selected as looking more like Dickie Moore. And the cutest thing is I actually went back and looked up the biography of Dickie Moore, and sure enough, at 4 years old, I looked like him because they showed his picture, because he was a child star to begin with. And I remember I won a blue, it looked like a blue Navy suit with anchors and all like that. So that was my win. But it was a lot of fun. And then my grandfather at that time had come to Orlando as a temporary rabbi, and he served the rabbinical thing for the congregation of Shalom for about 3 or 4 years. And in fact, the sermonettes that you now have in the archives were his sermons for that congregation, because very few of them knew Yiddish, which was his major language. And he would write them out in his script, and he would read it in English to his congregation. So we would go to services, and I was in the Sunday school, and I was always, whatever they put on a play, I was always the star of the play. Not that I was that great, but for some reason they always picked me out.
The neighborhood that you grew up in, was that a Jewish neighborhood?
If you want to call it that. We had in fact, it was funny because we were down there about a year ago, and I had my daughter and her husband drive me by my original house, and it's still standing. Wow. It was on DeWitt Drive, and there were, I think there were 6 Jewish families. It was not a major group, but there were about 6. My aunt and uncle lived across the street from us, and then my uncle's brother lived next to him, and then my girlfriend lived down the street from them. So there were about 6 or 7 Jewish families there. So.
Was it only Jewish families that went to the kosher butcher, or did your father's
serve? Originally, I think the store was called the National Grocery Store. So they carried dry goods as well as meats and delicatessen. But predominantly it was a kosher market. I mean, the kosher, they didn't have any treif, food, so everything in the store was kosher by that. But they would sell in during the Depression whatever money you had, and you put it on the tab, and then they try to collect from it.
Right. What are your memories of? So we're in the 1930s as Hitler comes to power, and do you remember that period?
It actually, from my standpoint, never knew about it. I mean, it was never discussed in the home. It was not a topic that was even brought up in the congregation. So until really, I guess until we got up to Jacksonville, it became more apparent of that. And that was already in 38, 39 when the war began. Because I remember, on September 1st when they invaded Poland. So I was 10 years old then. So I became aware of it. As far as the concentration camps, it probably was well into the 40s, because that we even knew they existed. I mean, it was we were sheltered, I guess, in that particular area.
Did you, as a child growing up in Florida, ever experience anti-Semitism?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I was thinking about that. In all my life, I never had anyone make a derogatory remark. I think one time I was in the Marine Corps, and somebody said something about being a dirty Jew or something like that, and it just kind of went over my head. But the cutest thing is, I was a chef. I was a cook in the Marine Corps, and I was stationed in Quantico, Virginia, and one of the cooks that came in after I was there, he was a Chinese, but his name was Jew, James Y. Jew, I'll never forget. So when the sergeant would call out, "Hey, Jew," both he and I would come, not knowing which Jew he wanted, me or the China. But we used to go on Liberty a lot to Washington and to New York, but we always joked around because we weren't sure which Jew he was trying to get to do some work there.
So how long did your family live in Orlando? When was the move?
Well, when my parents got married, they were here in Jacksonville in about 1926. They got married in 26. And I think within 6 months, the store in Orlando opened up. Now that was, during the boom, so to speak. So my father decided to move there. His older sister, his elder sister, and her husband and their 2 children already had lived in Orlando. So, they came into a population, and it was a very nice Jewish population in Orlando at the time. I think in our Sunday school, if I remember, there must have been 40 or 50 Jewish kids. So there was a fairly nice population. Yeah. One synagogue, Ohad Shalom was the synagogue. And
how did that compare to Jacksonville at the time? Was Jacksonville still much larger?
Oh, yeah. Excuse me. That'll do them. Let me dull it. Everybody wants to sell me something. Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
So the comparison between the sizes of the
Jacksonville
communities
was much bigger. When we moved back up here in '37, it was.
Right.
There were already 3 kosher markets in Jacksonville.
Wow.
My uncle ran his father's store, which was Safer's Market. Then the Beckers had a kosher market. Right. And then there was another family that was named Hammerman, and they had a kosher market. So there were 3 kosher markets in here. Synagogue, the Jacksonville Jewish Center they were the conservative and Orthodox combined, and the temple of whatever, they were the Reform. Yeah. So the population was, to me, was quite large. I mean, I would say the center must have had, 500 or more members, and the temple had a comparable amount.
Did you still feel a sense of community going from a smaller place to a much larger?
My only problem was I really didn't want to leave Orlando.
Right.
And the main reason is I just had learned how to spell Orlando. And Jacksonville was too many letters, and I really and truly, I was crying because I said, and I have to learn how to spell a new city, and that disturbed me further. I mean, I had all these emotional problems as a child, nearly ending up in jail stealing mail, and now I've got exonerated there, but I shouldn't have put that in there.
No, that's
And your mom grew up in St. Augustine, is
Yeah,
that right?
she was born in Newark. Her parents were from Transylvania, which was at that time Hungary, but later became Romania. But they came to Florida in about the early part of 1900. My mother was born in Newark in 1904, and they moved to St. Augustine in 1908. And so she had 3 brothers and herself. The family was larger, but I think my grandmother had lost like 8 children during their tenure in Transylvania, or wherever they lived in the Jewish area of Romania now. And they came to St. Augustine. My grandfather was a quote unquote a tailor. My grandmother did most of the sewing and that type of thing. And they eventually opened up a hotel, which was the Chautauqua Hotel. Now, if you know St. Augustine, it was directly across from the slave market. You can't say slave market now, but for whatever you call that.
Yeah, they call it that.
The Save
Yeah, yeah,
Market
that's
there
right.
on King Street.
Right.
And they had a hotel on the second level. And it was really interesting because my grandmother, my grandfather was about 6'1" and my grandmother was about 4'11". So it was an interesting, but she ruled the roost. And my mother took after her mother, for sure. My grandfather, he was a great guy, but in fact, he was one of the presidents of the synagogue. And if you go to the Sons of Israel down there, my grandfather's name was, he was president at the time when the synagogue was built. And my mother was the first person to be married in that synagogue. So the wedding, that's another story, their marriage. But anyway, so they were there. Now, the only trouble with my grandfather was, as I mentioned, he was a tailor, but he was also colorblind. And I'm colorblind, which is another story we can talk. But anyway, so I never could figure out, after I learned what colorblindness was about, I said, how could your father, to my mother, how could your father be a tailor? Well, he didn't stay in the tailoring business very long, so he opened like a grocery store.
Right.
But my grandmother ran the hotel, and they catered mainly to the, St. Augustine basically was the end of the railroad. Flagler had gotten there. Miami was non-existent. There was a swamp down there in the early part of the 1900s. So anybody traveling had to get off in St. Augustine. And predominantly the salespeople, whatever they call, would stop in St. Augustine. And my grandparents more or less catered to that group. But the most famous individual who stayed with them was Minnie Marks. That was Brazzo's mother. And she would come to St. Augustine for vacation. And she would always stay at their hotel. So.
Wonderful.
And for some reason, my mother said that her mother and father were the godparents of a actor. I don't know if you probably wouldn't remember. I doubt if you would. It was David Wayne. Does a name ring a bell to you? He was he was an actor. I mean, he was there. And how they got to St. Augustine, but apparently he was Jewish, and the mother gave birth to him there, and my grandparents were supposedly his godparents, and that was the only thing there.
Right.
But they had a great life. My uncle and my two uncles used to sell newspapers. The older brother, he had paralysis, he had polio. And that was one of the reasons they moved to Florida, because they lived in Jersey at the time. And he contracted polio, so he was crippled. And he and his brother used to sell newspapers in St. Augustine. And his name was Max. And Max always got to go into the Ponce de Leon Hotel. Now, the Ponce would be like the Roney Plaza or Trump or whatever you want to call it, the premier hotel in St. Augustine. I mean, anybody that went to St. Augustine with money would stay at the Ponce. Right. And Max was the only young boy that they allowed to sell the newspaper. He was crippled, he was on crutches and all. And my uncle was like me. He had a yarn for everybody. So he'd come home after a day selling paper. He'd take maybe $10. If the paper cost a nickel, he'd get $1 for it. And my other uncle, his brother, would come home maybe with 30 cents or 40 cents. So Max he could sell ice to the Eskimos. I mean, that's basically what it was. And he was a great guy. He was my mentor, if you would. I loved him. He was.
Were there strong ties between the St. Augustine community and the Jacksonville?
Yeah, very much so, because obviously the fact that they didn't have any kosher markets here, they had their own congregations, so they virtually had to go to Jacksonville to pick up their kosher food, and they came back.
Right.
My grandfather, so-called because he was a Levi, he so-called was the shepherd, so he would kill the chickens for pretty much the population. But as far as meat, they didn't have a shepherd here, so
Right.
they would go to Jacksonville, and my mother would go. They'd either catch the train up there. When they first got there, the only one that had a car that I know of, I'm sure there were a few people had cars, but my grandmother's sister and brother-in-law owned a car, so they would travel to Jacksonville in the car that way.
I know from Stacey that I need to ask you about your Boy Scouting experiences.
And before we get to that, can we just stay in St. Augustine for a
Sure.
wee bit longer? Can you explain to Rebecca about your mother playing poker with the guests?
Oh, yeah. Well, my mother was, okay, so she was born in 1904. They got to St. Augustine in 08, and apparently she might have been 8 or 10 years old. She was a very precocious young lady. And all of these elderly gentlemen, they would be 40 years old or so, would come, and they used to like casino more than poker. Okay. And they always would need a fourth hand. And so my mother was the fourth hand, and she would beat them. Right. She was also the entertainment because she learned the piano. In fact, she went to a nun taught her how to play. She played beautifully, really. And she would entertain the guests in the hotel. And she was also the tourist guide.
Wow.
So when she would go, when they come in, they naturally, St. Augustine being what it was, they would ask her to take them on a tour. Well, Mary would take them, and she'd do the history of St. Augustine, but I always said that she greeted Ponce de Leon at the Fountain of Youth, because she drank from it and nobody else did. So she was there in 1513 or something when he arrived. So anyway, she would go through and take them on the tour. And the guides at the various places hated her because she never got a tip, and they never got any money from the guests that came from the hotel. But she knew it. In years when we used to bring her up there, because my wife and I after my dad died and all like that, we were back in Jacksonville. That was her birthday gift, was to take her back to St. Augustine. So it was great because she said, well, this wasn't really old. You know, they just built that for just a tourist trap. And she would point out what was placed there that shouldn't have been placed there because it wasn't there when she was
there.
Got there. So anyway, but she had, there's one story, and Stacey knows about it. She was about 10 years old, and she had a sore throat. So my grandmother running the hotel didn't have time to worry with it. So she said, Mary, go to the doctor and see what he said about your sore throat. So my mother went to the doctor, and he said, well, this must have been like a Thursday or Friday. He says, well, I want you back here on Monday. We're going to take out your tonsils because your tonsils are full. And my mother said, thank you. And she went home. So my grandmother said, well, what did the doctor say? He said, it's all right, it'll go away in a couple of days. So she died at 102 and a half, but she still had her tonsils. She never had them taken out.
That's a great story.
Which was all, and that was Mary.
She was a character.
In her conversation with Sam in her oral history, she used to talk about a candy store that's, I can't remember the name of it, but it was near where the gates were. It was a funny name. And there were two elderly gentlemen that ran it. And the school, the junior high, I think, was Catalinas, was fairly close to where the. And my mother said that all the kids were afraid of them because they were just two old mean people that ran a candy store. And they would run in and put down their penny or whatever to buy the candy and ran out of there because they know the old men would get to them and, you know, no telling what they were going to do to them. So she would talk about, and she did an excellent job with, you know, to Sam, talking about the Jewish community there and everybody that lived at that particular period of time.
And I know that you love history too, and you've loved recording your family's history, and we'll go into that later, but do you think you get that from her? Is that something she passed on to you?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, she was an interesting, you know, not to brag about an individual, well, I do brag about her because she was a phenomenal individual, but she could talk with anyone, and age made no difference. When she was in River Garden, my son would bring his 3 sons to visit her, and it was like every Sunday they'd come over to visit. And at that time, she may have been 97, 98, like that. And she could sit and talk with my grandchildren about baseball, football, anything. And I think the funniest thing was one time the eldest had the earplugs and he was listening to some rap music or something like that. My mother said to him, "Mark, if you could explain to me what they are saying, I'll listen to that stuff. But so far, I've never understood a word that came out of their mouth." So, but that was her, and she was very straightforward, and if she didn't like it, she said she didn't like it. She didn't like a couple of her sister-in-laws, but we won't go into that because this is on tape
right.
now.
This
So I
is
have
historical
to be very, somebody interviewed her, one of our relatives, and Stacey knows the situation, and she didn't speak well about one of the sister-in-laws, and so we've had to remove it from the tape just to make sure, because the children of the sister was still alive, so we're very cautious of who and what we show our material to.
Absolutely.
We understand the role of the historian very well.
Indeed. So going back to your childhood and growing up, and I mentioned earlier about Boy Scouting, you were going to tell me something?
Well, Jackson, obviously in the Boy Scouts, you had the Cub Scouts, and I was a Cub Scout. In the Boy Scouts, there were two Jewish troops. Troop 14 was a center troop, and then Troop 12 was for the temple. And I went through the ranks. I became an Eagle, I think a Gold Palm or something like that. But I loved it. I mean, I was, I don't know how.
Didn't you do some camping trips, like out to Camp Landing? I'm visualizing you in the back of a truck with a lot of fruit.
Yeah, you know what? Our scoutmaster was Ben Chetnick, and actually he was married to a cousin of my dad, and he was our scoutmaster. And the Chetnick family had a produce market. How did you know about that?
Because you've told me about it.
Well, we used to go to Camp Chakotay, which is in Orange Park,
That's right,
and he would bring one of the produce trucks, and he would fill it up with bananas and oranges and everything like that. And we'd ride in the back of the truck going into Camp Chakotay. So we had fresh fruit in there. Wow. I think most of it got thrown at each other more so than we ate. At that time, a kid at 12, 13, 14 was not eating fruit. Right. Not healthy to eat. But anyway, it was a lot of fun being with them. But it was, and everybody, it's interesting because the youth of Jacksonville, virtually, you grew up, there was no USY, there were no Kademas, there were nothing that the current, and it shows because none of the youth of today, I think maybe they got maybe 20 members or something like that. But when we were growing up, if you didn't belong to the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts, right. You had no, and we didn't have our social life was going to the Scout meeting, right. Going on hikes or something like that. And then when we grew older, we had the AZA, and the girls were in the BBG, which was the
What do those acronyms stand for?
AZA is Olive Sadiq Olive, and BBG was BBG, B'nai B'rith Girls.
Okay, yeah.
And the girls would join there, and the boys were in the AZA. Now, the temple, they didn't, I don't remember them ever having a girl. They had what they call the Esquire Club. So they were comparable, and so most of the male youth of that period belonged, if you were a temple member, you'd belong to Esquire, and if you were a center member, you'd belong to ACA. But a lot of, they would cross because of friendships. A lot of the people that went to the center, like the guys in the temple, so they would join there. So, I mean, it wasn't anything that, it was a friendly, what would be the word? We were friends, but we weren't friends, you know.
Friendly rivalry?
Right, thank you.
You're
That's
very
why I
welcome.
keep her along.
That's how you buy lunch. Okay.
Usually she sends it to me on the email, so I don't know what to say. Anyway, but that was it. And then we'd always have either a football game with them or something. We usually won because we had the bigger guys on our team. They were kind of, I'm not going to say, but anyway, they weren't athletic in the Esquire.
But didn't you also have dances, and were there like bows and sweethearts? You know,
We always had a sweetheart in AZA, and not to brag, but I ended up from the AZA. I was the first. I think I was the secretary, the vice president. It was Olive Cadole, Olive Sagan, Olive Moskin, and Olive Gisborne, which were president, vice president, secretary. Mm-hmm. So I went up the ranks. So I ended up as Olive Cadole. And we would have AZA conventions, and we were in I think it was like the Southeast District, and the boys from Orlando, Tampa, Miami would come to Jacksonville, and we would go there. In other words, and once a year there was always an AZA convention. And I was friends very much with the youth in Savannah. So I had my own group down here, and then I was friends with the Savannah group, and they really were. I was somehow or another became much closer with them than I was with the Jacksonville group, although I ran it. And then I've got a picture of me. I was elected sweetheart of BBG.
Fantastic.
In my senior year, I think it was. So I had all these girls around me, hugging me, kissing me. But I was shy and demure.
yes, obviously that's such a.
Going to lower the tenor of the conversation a little bit, because I have notes here from Stacey saying, mention betting on baseball games, gambling at the beach.
So they're two separate things.
Oh,
But I want you to touch on both of them.
on the baseball game.
Well, let's do the baseball first because I think that's chronological, and then we'll matriculate over to the beach and the gambling summers.
Okay.
Okay.
Gambling on the baseball game. This was something not that I was aware of, but this was my father and his brothers.
So where in Jacksonville? Are we La Villa, Springfield?
Well, they were, at that particular time, they were living in La Villa. La Villa virtually, until my parents were married, in fact, their home in La Villa is still standing. I think it's a national, one of the national monuments.
Your parents' home?
No, grandparents on Monroe Street.
Oh,
that
okay,
house
yeah.
is still standing, and it's one of the national recognition.
Right.
It was weird when we had our reunion. I'll get back to the gambling.
Yeah.
But when we had our reunion, her father-in-law and I were responsible. Mm-hmm. And we had it here in Jacksonville. This was nearly the last of the reunions. And we had two buses.
We had two school buses.
Two school buses, and we must have had over 100, well, I don't know how many sits in a school bus, but both buses were filled, and we did a grand tour of the Jewish Jacksonville in 1994.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was quite interesting seeing these school buses slowly go down this particular part
Yeah,
of town.
and we
Right.
started in La Villa, and we'd go by, and doing my research, I knew the houses where the elder uncles and their family lived. So we passed each house, and this is where, because in the reunion, everybody's family was
Represented.
Right, right.
So we'd stop, this is your Uncle so-and-so's house,
Right.
and then they moved over here, and then they moved there. And like most of the Jews at the time, if they had enough money to buy a house, and they had a relative they couldn't pay,
Right.
then the relative moved in with them. And then as soon as that they moved, then the relative moved with them.
But it was great because you could see the relationship to Lithuania. Wasn't that where the Pushalatas?
Well, the Pushalatas was a separate group, but I mean,
But in
the
that
Pushalat society was in La Villa. In fact, their building still stands. It was right near the YMHA. But one of my great uncles, although the family didn't come from Pushalat, but that was the so-called charitable group from Lithuania.
Right.
And he was the president of it, and then his son, Safer, became the president and ran it. And it was a great group. I mean, particularly during the Depression, nobody had money. They could go there and they could get a loan for food, a house, and anything like that, and they paid them back whatever. And they took care of their own, so to speak. Okay, so back to the baseball. My dad was, well, let me start back. My uncle, which was the elder brother, he was Dr. Safer, and he was, I guess, the first Jewish doctor in Jackson. So he was a trip and a half, but anyway, amongst the things that he did, he learned telegraphy, and he was also a good liar. So that goes in the family tree. So he would say that at school, he knew telegraphy, he was very smart, and he would help the girls pass their tests. And what he would do is he would teach them Morse code, and he would type on the table, and they would pick up A, B, C, whatever the letter would be for him. And the girls would knew it, and they would pass the test. Well, the instructor, he went to La Villa High, and then I think it was Duval High School. The professor or the teacher would say, Jacob, why are you beating on the table? He said, I'm just nervous, I'm taking the test, and nothing else in there. Okay, so he must have been about 17, 18 years old. He got a job with the newspaper, and at that time, this would be 1918, after the war. Radios had not come back, so if anybody was waiting for the World Series, or which was going on then, they would telegraph it to the newspaper, and at that time, the Florida Times Union was on Adams Street in Pearl, I think, and he would sit, the building is, I think they've torn the building, but anyway, he would sit up, and he was getting the information on the game, okay? And then there would be an announcer sitting in there, and he would be announcing. And I remember as a kid, when we listened to the radio during the 40s, there was an announcer that would announce the game, and he did the same thing. He was in Jacksonville, and Jacksonville could be playing in Charleston, and he would get the information, and he would report it, and if it was a hit, bam, there was a hit, your home run or whatever. So anyway, Jake would get the information, and he would pass it on. This is strike one, strike two, something like that. Now, my dad was 2 years younger than him, so he would have been maybe 16 years old. So my dad would be downstairs listening to the game because he loved sports, and he never got past the 4th grade, so he worked in the market with my grandfather. So when the World Series came, he got off. So he was staying down there, and the game was going on, And Jake would signal to my father, like whatever their signals that they had, that the next hit would drive in a run. So it could be the worst player up, and my father would say, okay, I'm going to bet that the next pitch the guy's going to hit a double or a home run. And everybody would bet with my father. So sure enough, next pitch, bam, home run. So my father collected the money. They made a profession of collecting money. So, I mean, they went through school with a lot of money in their pocket because they kind of conned everybody into believing that my father was able to
predict.
To make the prediction of what's going.
They invented insider trading.
Right. I think it was worse.
That's a
than
good way of
insider
putting
trading.
it.
It was a scam. And as far as the gambling, Jacksonville was a very open city. I mean, now, I mean, you know, we have Las Vegas and the gambling at the dog track and all. But kids could go in and gamble, and out at the beach they would, they had about 3 gambling places up there. And during the summer, I mean, everybody went to the beach. I mean, our vacation was at the beach. Everybody had at least 2 weeks there, and so that's about all we had with the gambling.
Well, didn't the women go somewhere and the men went upstairs?
Well, the women always sat down. There was a big building at the beach. Are you from Jacksonville? No, you're not. It was called the Flag, and upstairs at the Flag was downstairs it was like a food place, and they had that skeet bowling, and they had different arcades and all like that. And then upstairs they actually had a dice, you could roulette, cards, all like that. So all the men would go up there, and the women would line up, and this is right where the Casa Marina Hotel is now. The Flag was right next to it. So all the women would be down there, the kids were out in the beach swimming, and that would be our Sunday. But it's fascinating because, to be honest with you, I guess until I was, I don't know, 15, 16 years old, every year. And it was cute because the husbands never came to the beach. It was the wife and the children would spend and then the husband would come in like Friday night or Saturday, spend the day with the family, and then go back to the city, which was all of 18 miles or something like that to go in there. They'd work the week and then come back. So the men could get together at night, and the women, you know, they had kibbutz during the day, and that was our lifestyle.
Right.
But it was good. You know, and my grandparents lived there, and there's a cute story because at one time you would, well, it happened, I think in 1942 or 1944, there was a German submarine off of Ponte Vedra, and there were some, they let off some spies or something. They finally caught them. But I remember at that particular time, during the war, if you came to the beach, there was only one road, which was Atlantic Boulevard, and you would line up to get off over the bridge, and you had to paint your headlights black on the bottom of it or on the top of it, so you could only use like the dimmers. And they would stop you at the bridge to make sure you didn't pick up a German spy along the way. So this was during the war, but anyway, so they caught the spies that got off the U-boat, but they actually landed, took a raft or whatever into Ponte Vedra, so that's where they got in. Well, anyway, my grandfather, he, at that particular time, the center was primarily conservative, and only during the High Holy Days with the old Jewish Center on 3rd Street, the synagogue was on the 2nd floor, and underneath was like an auditorium. So they allowed my grandfather to have the Orthodox service down because there were no Orthodox synagogues at that particular time. So my grandfather used to run that service. And during the summer, he would sit down and write. Well, he was sitting on the pier writing in Yiddish or whatever his sermon for the holidays. This would be July or August. And somebody saw him writing a funny script, and they contacted the FBI, and that he's a spy because he's sitting on there looking out into the ocean.
Right.
They think he's sending messages to a German U-boat, and they came and they picked him up, and he had to explain to him, he was a rabbi, and that he's only writing his sermon for the High Holy Days.
Oh my
But so that was an experience that we relished having him being sought out of as a German spy.
Do you remember experiencing the war in any other way? I mean, economically or no other impact?
No, I mean, I guess we were naive. I was saying to Stacey the other way, even coming over, I said, we were an innocent generation. The children were anyway. I mean, we knew there was a war. Our family, well, my youngest uncle, he was drafted, and they let him out because he had a weak stomach. He couldn't eat onions. He'd get sick. So eventually, fortunately, he got out. And then the doctor, he was in practice in here, and for some reason, he was overaged, and he enlisted as a doctor. Well, his experiences were beyond belief. And I can't remember the name. There was a coach. Let me back up. Jake, he started out as a pharmacist. So his pharmacy degree, he went to someplace in Georgia, and I think he spent a week there. And he came out, he was a pharmacist, and he bought a pharmacy in what is now on Davis Street, was then bought by a friend of Stacey's parents, so we connected there. But anyway, then he decided he wanted to become a doctor, so he came to the University of Florida in 1925. And so he would have been about 27 years old then. Wow. He was born in 1898, so 24, 25. So, in fact, he was one of the founding brothers of my fraternity, the TEP fraternity here in Gainesville.
Yes.
But he also, somehow or another, Zeke knew everybody, but he happened to know the coach of the Gators at that time. Mm-hmm. And I, for the world of it, I can't think of his name. But anyway, he ended up as one of the generals in the North African invasion. And now, as I say, Jake could expand the truth. But anyway, his story went that he met up because he landed in North Africa. And he was a doctor with some surgical unit. It's basically, he was in a MASH unit before MASH became popular. So he was in North Africa, and he met up with this general, and apparently Teddy Roosevelt, colonel, he was a colonel, that was Theodore Roosevelt's son, was also in the military, and he was in North Africa. So the three of them would used to pal around. Now, Jake palling around with the general is beyond me. But if Jake said so, I said, okay, if you say, he's a story and a half anyway. And they were getting ready, I guess, for the Sicily invasion, and they were packing up everything. Jake said he couldn't go because all of his uniforms were in the cleaners. I think they were in Casablanca at the time. So the general said, don't worry about them. You'll go anyway, and we'll get you clothes when you get there to Sicily. So that was his story. Now, there's another story that I won't relate to, that he was in the army, he was in North Africa, But I don't think the exploits that he explained might have been something Spielberg put in a movie that he would remember or something like that.
Right.
But I won't belittle his memory at this time, particularly again since it's on the day. But he's not here. He's floating in the, when he died.
He came right back here when he...
Yeah, it's interesting because when he passed away, he wanted, we gave a donation to the medical school, and he donated his body to the medical for the anatomy department.
Right. Here at UF.
Yeah,
Wow.
at the medical school.
Right,
He died in 97 or somewhere around
Right.
95, I guess. And I was his, of all the people to get, I was his caregiver. And so that was his desire. He wanted to have his body shipped here. So I shipped him, and then after they finished, they called me and they said, we're ready, there, and what do you want to do with the remains? And I said, what's the option? He said, well, he's been cremated. So I said, do you want the ashes? I said, well, not really. I said, what, anything else you can, whatever you want, we'll do with it. I said, I tell you, he liked to fish. How about taking him in a plane, dumping his ashes in the Gulf of Mexico? And he was eating fish from the Gulf, let the fish eat him. So,
Very practical.
sometimes you have to do it. But in the meantime, the problem is that one of his brothers was very religious in the family. And he kept asking, where's Jake buried? I want to come and visit, St. Cottage over his grave and all like that. I said, don't worry, Uncle Abba. I said, he's buried in Gainesville, and everybody's saying cottage for him in Gainesville. So, if he accepted it, fine. If he did, I don't know. But that's how it ended, in other words. So, whatever's left of him is in the Gulf of Mexico, which he's very happy.
Okay, so we're staying on the, since we're on the University of Florida, you came here.
Right.
When did you come and what did you study?
I actually got here in 1948. I was telling Stacey, at that time, the population at the university was 12,000 students, all male,
Quite different.
and there were 500 co-eds. And I think in 46 to 47,
Right.
because it was all male school up to that particular time, and I think it was 46 to 47, where they became a co-ed, co-educational. FSU at the time was strictly female college. It was a college for education or something like that. And when Florida became co-ed, FSU then also started taking male students. So there were 12,000 students here, and I was telling her when we came in that I came in 48, and I graduated in 1950. So I finished in 2.5 years. I got my bachelor's degree because I wanted to go to veterinary school. So I came here as a freshman during the winter term or whatever, then transferred to Georgia because we had a friend that I thought was going to get me into the vet school there. Unfortunately, the states decided that they don't have enough money to build a veterinary college in each state. So they started a regional program. So anybody from Florida had to go to Auburn, and people from Maryland down to Georgia went to Georgia because there were only 2 veterinary colleges in the southeast. So I had to come back to Florida, and by that time I was already half sophomore, half junior. And God bless him, Dr. Rice, is it Rice, J. Wayne?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
He was the provost of the Ag College. And he hated me, not because I was malicious or anything like that, but I always needed classes that he would have to approve. And so finally, because I was trying to graduate, not knowing that I was going to be in the Marine Corps about 8 months, because I graduated in August and the Marines in October. That wasn't my intent. So anyway, it got to the point that anytime I came into the Ag College over here, and the secretary said, is that safer? Yeah. give him whatever he wants, give it to him. I don't want to even talk to him about it. Because he was giving me classes that I didn't even know existed, just so I could get the number of hours. I was sophomore, junior, and senior at one particular time from the number of hours. But I'll never forget him. Because, I mean, he was great. I mean, it was kind of a joke between he and I. But it ended up as whatever he wants, let him have it. And we'll be finished with him. He can graduate, and that was the end of me at the University of Florida.
And what was your experience in the fraternity? It was TEP, did you say? It was the fraternity?
It was TEP, yeah. We were over where the alligator was.
Right.
They just tore the building down. It was great. I mean, most of the students at that time primarily were the returning veterans, because I was here I started school in 47. I went to an ag college. I ended up in Pennsylvania, and I hit a snowstorm, and I came back, and I said, I can't go back up there. I can't stay in the snow. Right. So I missed a semester, so I got in here. And as I said, I was trying to get in the veterinary college at Georgia. So I had to take so many classes to meet their requirements. And then when I got there, they said, well, we can't take you now. You have to go back and go to Auburn. So I ended up in Georgia, Florida, and Auburn. So I figured from 3 teams, I always had a winning season.
Edwin, before we leave the campus, and I think the statute of limitations should be over, but can you explore how TEP and the classes you had to take and the tests that you had to pass, those were all integral players in your experience in graduating from the university?
Yeah. Probably nobody remembers the C courses here. Do you remember the C courses? You don't remember. When you came here, again, this was 1948, the first 2 years were prescribed courses. It was C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right. So during your freshman year, you took C1, C11, and C12s. 22, 20, 21, 22, 32, 31, 32, whatever. And then sophomore year, you took the other classes, 4, 5, and 6. So at the end of the year, you would have had history, math, biology, humanities. What are the other 2? History, math, biology, humanities, English. I can't remember. Anyway, so that was it. And when we were walking in, I said, we rarely came to the library. I admit it. Okay. But when we did come to the library, it was to study for the exams. Right. Now, the fraternity the fraternity had been here since 1925. And I think the C courses must have been in vogue from 1925 on. So they had virtually every exam that was given for the C courses. Yeah. So you would see the entire fraternity, at least the freshman and sophomore, up here in the library with a stack of these old tests that we were studying. Now, if you had a good memory, you could pass by just memorizing the answers, because they never changed the questions. I mean, they varied the questions for each test they gave in the semester, but it was the same questions. So it was, if you had a good mind, you had it. And the greatest thing is, I think the worst subject that I had was English. Right. And fortunately, I studied the C test very, very good. I ended up with an A. And everybody in the fraternity went crazy because they said, how did you make an A in there? I said, I knew the English perfectly, But I learned the test. I learned the test perfectly, and I passed the C class. I think it was 31 or 32. So I think that was about the first A I got in college was the C class.
Well, speaking of C, you were talking about the college and like the social life here, the CI.
That was going into Starbucks now. I said, what an amazing transition, because our main place of gathering was near where the church is. There was a Sigma Chi house and down on University.
Where the new apartment building is, where the church is.
And there was College Inn.
Yeah.
It was called the CI, the College
Right.
Inn.
Okay.
And so you'd go in there for that was your lunch or, you know, your, no hard liquor.
Was there
we
a
had-
student union? Did the student union exist?
There was a student union, but they not anything, if you could imagine. I mean, well, you know what the old library was.
Yep.
You're in it.
Yep.
So that was our library.
Right.
The law school was down next to it over in this area.
Goodness.
Ag school was down near, I don't remember the name of the building, but was near where the dorms are. It was, I think, Murphy, and I don't know if they're still here, Murphy and Sled and all like that. And that was the ag school. The pharmacy school was down there.
Not quite so big and sprawling and maybe imposing back then. I mean, now maybe when you come here, the campus is so large. Maybe then it felt a smaller
It was
place.
much smaller, obviously. I mean, the football field, I think, basically was there because I remember at Murphy, right outside was the tennis courts, and then the football field was right behind it.
Did you go to the games? Were you?
Yeah, we lost all the time. This was 1948,
Yeah.
and it was cute because the fraternity go, and you know, if you have 12,000 students, you didn't have many people in the stadium. It may have held 20,000 if it held that many.
And you were all in shirts and ties, right?
No,
you
no,
weren't
we
at that
didn't. But
point?
we did have our beanies.
Right,
We
okay.
used to have a rat cap, and
Right.
if you were afraid, and if Florida beat Georgia, we could throw away the rat cap. But you had to wear it at least through that game.
Right.
Well, the coach was Bear Wolf was his name, not Bear Bryant, but Bear Wolf. We never won. I thought if we won 3 games a year, we won. So it got to the point that if we were winning at halftime, we figured we won half a game. And we'd go back to the fraternity house and party. And we'd have Purple Passion or whatever other concoction that the guys could make up. But we celebrated the half victory because we could be sure by the end of the game we would have
Truly
lost.
glass half full.
Yes.
We would have lost it anyway. So, but that was our fun and games was going. But we did. Everybody went to the game, and we stayed at least for the halftime.
And then you said you went into the military, so that was.
Yeah, that was an experience. I joined the Marine Reserve when I went to Savannah because I was going to Georgia, and I stopped in Savannah during the summer. So this was in '48. So everybody said, "Oh, let's join the Marine."
Did you hitchhike up to Savannah like you would hitchhike
Oh, no,
home
no,
from Jackson?
I caught
You used
the
to
train.
hitchhike back to Jack's
From here.
Gainesville.
Wow.
Yeah, we all from what is that? 441.
Yeah, the
whatever
Waldo Road,
Right.
yeah.
the road there. Which they now.
Did everybody do that? Or
Yeah.
did you- yeah.
I mean,
You
nobody
felt
had
safe.
cars.
Right.
At our fraternity, there was one car. 2 brothers, the Glazer brothers, had a car. And it was about a 1929 and 1930 Ford. That was the only car in front of the fraternity house. Then a second car came when one of the veterans came in, and he had a car. His name was Art Callan, I'll never forget. So we had 2 cars in front of the fraternity house. Now you can't even find a parking place in front of the fraternity house.
Amazing.
So anyway, but the only way you got from here to Jacksonville, and everybody that had cars, usually professors or whoever was going, they'd always pick up the students. And I say, we didn't even have, Blanding was there, but we usually went down to Normandy Boulevard and they would bring us home or something like that. But when I went into the military, it was interesting. So everybody, we'd all enlisted in the Marines, and everybody got out. But I said, well, I'll stay in it. Well, anyway, now Korean War started, so I was naturally still in the reserve, inactive, but in the reserve. So they started calling all the Marine Reserves into active duty. So leave it to me. I get 2 letters the same day. Number 1, to report to the Marine Corps. I had to go to Paris Island. And the second letter was from that I've been drafted into the Army. Wow. So now I'm both in the Army and the Marine Corps at the same time. So I went down to the draft board. I threw the letters on the table and said, okay, who gets me? So they said, wherever you want to go. You're going into one or the other. You pick where you want to go. So I ended up in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
Foolishly.
I was going to say that was a tough choice to make.
Yeah, and now I got there and I took whatever exam to get it. I think in my platoon there was like 55 guys in the platoon, and I must have had like near the highest score. You had to take some kind of a scholarship test, and I think my score was like 138, 140 or something like that.
Did TEP help you out with that too? I'm just
Yeah, well, no, that one you had to really take on your own. But I passed it, so it was qualified as an officer.
Right.
So I finished boot camp at Parris Island. So I said, okay, that'd be great. I'll become a Marine officer. And at the time, I started reading the newspaper, and the first person I always see got killed was the lieutenant leading his patrol over a hill in Korea. I said, I don't think I want to become a lieutenant in the Marine Corps. So I go through the physical, and I pass everything, and then I come up to the eye exam, and I'm colorblind. So I take the test, and they give you a very simple, they use a Japanese thing with the various dots, the colors, and all like that. So they showed me something that was black and white, and they said, okay, read what number, okay. So I said, he said, okay, you passed the eye test. I said, wait a minute, I'm colorblind. And at that time, I don't know if they still do, but Marine Corps was a part of the Navy. In the Navy, if the officer candidate could not be colorblind. I guess you couldn't read the signal flags, on the ships. So you had to have perfect vision. So I said, I'm colorblind, and I know that the Navy doesn't take. Well, no, you're not colorblind. I said, give me the whole test. So he gave me, he said, well, I took the test and I failed it, obviously. And so he said, we'll bypass it. We can waiver that and get you to go to Quantico. I said, never mind, I'll just go take my chances elsewhere. So I ended up, and unfortunately for my platoon, I think about 4 of us or 5 of us, because I was like the highest level there, I got a choice of duty stations. So I had really 2 choices. Either number 1, I could go to cook and baker school because I graduated in agriculture. Right. Or number 2, I could go FMF, which means Fleet Marines to Korea. So I said, okay, I'll go to cook and baker school. Now my mother was a great cook, but I couldn't even wash a dish. So the cook and baker school was in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune. So I went there. I ended up as the Toastmaster. I could make toast, and that was good. But I was the only one that could make a passing grade on the test, because you had to take a written test as well as a cooking test. Wow. Well, I made like a C or a C plus on cooking, but I was the highest grade in my written test. Right. So I ended up valedictorian of the cook class. And so now, second choice. And I'm thinking, oh God, I'm going to be choice of, and I already figured, because I had a girlfriend who lived up in Boston, I figured, okay, I'll get to the Boston Navy Yard. That's great. I could go to San Francisco. So that would be great. I picked out all the great places that I could have, because Guantanamo, where the Marines had to go to Cuba, wherever I wanted to go. So, okay, I graduated number 1. What was my choice? I could either go to Quantico or Korea. Okay, I went to Quantico. So that's where I spent the war in Quantico. Well, I ended up, actually, they got me out of the mess hall that I was in. I was a special cook for a group. We guarded one of the, this is during the Cold War. Right. They had like where the presidents, in the Washington area, if they had to evacuate the anybody legislate, right. They would send some, and I think some of the cabinet people were supposed to go where I was. I don't think the president was. So I ended up as the cook up there. So there were 18 Marines there as the guards, and I was their cook. And they were great. I fed them perfectly. I
Right.
used to get them steak 2 or 3 times a week. In fact, I had a big Thanksgiving dinner once when I was up there, and several of the generals from the Marine Barracks in Washington came there. They said, "This is great." He said, "Would you like to become a chef at the Marine Barracks in Washington?" I said, "How long do I have to stay yet?" He said, "Well, you'll need to stay an extra. You have to re-up."
Right.
And I was noted. I knew I was getting out there like in April. I said, "I have to stay for how long? At least 4 more years." I said, "Thank you. I'll just spend my time here and go home."
So how long were you in altogether?
Well, I enlisted in 48, but I was in for the 2 years.
Right.
Went on active duty in 50, and I was out in 52.
And so after then, what happened?
Then I had bought a farm, and I raised chickens, and then I got, finally, in 53, I had applied to Auburn for vet school, and I got accepted. I missed the 52 class, but I got in the class of 53.
When did you meet your wife? What's her name, and when did you meet her?
When did I meet her?
Yep.
I met her, I just finished 57 and met her here in Jacksonville, and we got married. I met her like in April, and we got married in November.
Right.
And I don't even think, we got married in Miami Beach at the Algiers Hotel. I don't even think it's still in existence, the Algiers.
I'm not sure.
But it was in the area of the Concord, the Fontainebleau, Algiers and all like that. My father-in-law wanted to have it, and I said, since he's paying for it, it's fine with me.
And her name?
Her name?
Yep.
Harriet.
Harriet Tanner?
It was Harriet Tanner,
were
with
they-
1 T.
Was Harriet's family from Jacksonville?
No, Fort Myers.
Myers, right.
In fact, it was good because her and her brother were really the only Jewish kids when they were growing up. And the same thing, because she would say she never experienced any type of anti-Semitic thing. Her father had the scrap iron junkyard there.
Right.
And he was, familiar with, and he was a Shriner. So he participated, in the local activity, and she went through public school, till college. She came to Gainesville for a year. She didn't like it, and then she went back to Jacksonville and got some kind of a degree and worked at Standard Oil. And we met and we got married.
And by that time, had you got a career in veterinary
Me?
medicine? Yeah.
No. I fought the Battle of Washington. I didn't mention about my cohort.
Your cohort? Which one?
James, the Chinese.
No.
I told you about.
Oh, you mean
The cook.
Yeah, the cook you told us. Yeah,
Oh.
but I think it'd be interesting to hear about your dog track experience and your marijuana
knows-
mice experience.
She knows more about me than I do.
Well, I'm just thinking if I had to write about something,
Well,
these are the
she's
things I would hit.
my biographer.
Right.
And I told her she's got to do my eulogy because I want it real
I'm just
good.
going to roll tape if that's okay with you. Okay.
I said, and I brought all my materials.
Yes, we'd
so,
like to look
she's-
at that.
I figured when I go, I want her to put a cell phone in my box so that I can listen to what she says, make sure she doesn't leave anything out. But anyway, so she's my mini-me. God bless her.
Okay, so let's talk about, did the mice experiment,
Oh,
was that
yeah.
happening at UF?
Yeah.
Okay, this is worth noting.
Okay.
Yeah, I taught at FCCJ, which is now Florida, Florida State College or whatever, but it was FCCJ. Anyway, one of the vice president of education there decided that everybody had to do a graduate level course other than teaching. Right. So I said, okay, I'll do one. So I came down to the vet school here. I think the doctor was Dr. Chang or something. And he was doing an experiment, and I explained to him that I needed to sign up for a course where I could do a graduate level project. Right. So he had a grant, and I'm not not sure with what company, but he was testing female mice to try to prove that it had, by ingesting or taking marijuana, it adversely affected their menstrual cycle and had some effect on their reproductive system.
Right.
So that was his total project.
Yeah.
And he said, if I want, you know, if your college will permit it and pay for it, you can do this experiment with the feeding marijuana to your control mice, and, you know, keep it a control group and the mice. So the marijuana group, they were happy as a lark because they used, and they had the munchies, and the other mice, they slept and all like that. Now we had to bring them down here to be sacrificed because they had to take out their pituitary gland and the female organs, and they were going to do it at the medical school. It was interesting because he was a veterinarian, but he was working with the UF Medical Science at the time. So now I have, at the time I had a Mazda RX-7, so it's a sporty car, and I have about 60 mice in the back seat of the car. I'm driving down here, and I stop at Start. There was a Hardee's there, and I pull up. I said, I want one cheeseburger for me, and I need about 50 hamburgers for my guests in the back. And they looked in the back, and all the mice went. So you really want them? I said, no, just give me the cheeseburger for me. I'll tell them they'll eat when we get to Gainesville. But anyway, so we went, and then I had to write a report on it. And it did affect the female mice. And he wrote up a report. Right. So I made an A in the course, and that was my goal in my, and then I went to, I did good in graduate school, but I never pursued it.
Right.
Because I went to space camp in Cape Canaveral when I was teaching at FCCJ. And we had to go to UNF and take a class in writing something on the space, and so I made an A in that. And so I had 2 A's in my graduate level. I said, I want to go back. I just told her, I said, I could have been a student here forever. I mean, that's my goal, is just stay here in Gainesville, have fun, you know, drink coffee with the guys and just enjoy myself. But I can't get rid of my wife, so I stay with her. Cut that out.
So what was your profession? What did you do after?
Actually, I graduated as a veterinarian,
right.
And I practiced for about 5 or 6 years in Jacksonville.
Which area of veterinary medicine?
Where?
Which area of veterinary medicine did you specialize
small animals.
in? Small animals, right.
To be honest with you, I did not like it.
Right.
I think my mind was more scientific oriented. So after 6 years, I told my wife, we had the 2 kids, and they were, I don't know, 5 and 2 or 5 and 3, something like that. So I said, I can't stay in practice. So I closed my practice, and I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school. So I had an opportunity to go to Iowa State, the vet college there, and went up there, and I'd been out of school 57, maybe 6, 7 years. And at that particular time, I said, I just don't have the patience to start back, because I had to go through some pre-courses to get into the master's program there. So when I was in Jacksonville, I was director of the Humane Society. Beside my practice, I taught adjunct class at JU, a biology class. And then I was also the director of the Humane Society, which was fairly close to where my hospital was. So I happened to see an ad that they were looking for an instructor, not an instructor, but an individual at ASPCA in New York. So I applied, and I said that I was director of the Humane Society. I didn't know, what the job was. And sight unseen, they took me, and they said, if you'll come to New York, we'll hire you. Well, the job, to me, it was really fascinating. It wasn't in practice because I didn't have a license to practice in New York State, but I was made in charge of their lab animal section. New York was interesting because the ASPCA virtually had control over any laboratory research was under if you were using animals, or obviously lab animals, was under the control of ASPCA. There was something Metcalf law, and that if anything went wrong, the ASPCA had the right to stop your research. So I said fine, and so they made me the inspector. So my job was to inspect all of the hospitals in the city of New York and virtually in the state of New York, if I wanted, as far as I could go, to examine the places and make sure that the animals are kept in the proper area, clean and all like that. And they gave me this one individual, his name was, I think, O'Brien or something like that. Can't remember. Jolly old fella. He had worked for the Humane Society, ASPCA, for 50 years. In fact, he wrote a book. It was called 50 Years in the Doghouse. And his stories were about as funny as my stories were. So we used to ride, and we had a car, and I used to joke because he carried a gun. I don't know if he ever shot a gun. But his thrill was riding down either like 7th Avenue or Broadway, and he would see an old lady crossing the street. He'd speed up and then slam on the brakes just before he got to it and scared her. And he was just jovial. Oh, that was the greatest fun. And these women probably had an accident, being scared. So that was our daily procedure. Okay, so now we would go around to the various hospitals. So 2 hospitals that I remember very well, and we covered everyone. Sloan Kettering, which was an interesting feature. Sloan Kettering was very unusual at that time because they were doing, this was 63, 64, so they were getting more into the cancer research. And their guide was any of their surgeons actually operated on an animal before they would do human surgery. In other words, they would the surgical team would work on the animal. And if it was a liver transplant or something like that, they would proceed to do that procedure before they, did it on the human. There was Mount Sinai, Columbia Presbyterian, but the greatest was there was a VA hospital in the Bronx, and they were the most atrocious hospital of all. And I got in there, this is the government now, and they were doing research there, but the way the animals were kept, I said, okay, you got 30 days, I'll be back. Now, if you want to keep your research going, then this place better be clean. I'll see you in 30 days. So 30 days later, I came in. It was neat. It was the best hospital of them all. Then there was another hospital. This was cute. It was down 14th Street or something. There was Beth Israel. It wasn't Beth Israel, but it was down. And they were doing an experiment on, this goes back now in the 60s, the birth control pill at the time was called Inovid, or Inovid or Inovid. And they were doing an experiment for whatever the company was. And they were so excited because they were showing me the animals and they were using rabbits. And it was worked perfectly, birth control, and they were giving it to the female rabbit. They never. So, me with my mouth, I said, you realize that a rabbit won't ovulate until they copulate. So if you have the female rabbits in there by themselves, they'll never ovulate until you put them with a buck.
Right.
They invited me to leave. So they never wrote up the subject.
You ruined it all.
Then there was another one, I think it was the Columbia Presbyterian, which I loved because they had a bunch of, I think it was pigeons or something, where they were teaching the pigeons which drawer to hit in order to get the food. It was the most fascinating thing of just going to these places and seeing the work that they did. And then after that, I was said, well, this is great, but I want something better. So I'd written a book for them, and I started a course where we were training the lab technicians that were working at the hospital could come to the ASPCA and take a class. Well, I'd written the book for them and set up the program for them. Then I left and I went to Pfizer, and I was fortunate. A friend of mine, one of my college mates from Auburn, was the head of the department. So I said, I'd like to come work for Pfizer. He said, the only thing I've got available, I can put you in the field, or I could get you to work here, but the only thing you could work here would be as the head of the technical writing department. Right. Well, I never, other than writing the book for ASPCA, I'm not that great. She does all my writing for me. So I said, I had to use my mind like in the Marine Corps. I said, I go in the field, nobody will ever know I'm there. If I stay in New York, this is the headquarters. So if I'm going to make any kind of advancement, I better stay here. So I said, okay, I'll take the tech writing. So I had a tech writer who was very good, and I was in charge of him. So my department was him and me, and we did all of the writing, the advertising, we had to approve that and all like that. I was there about a year and a half, 2 years, and my friend, who is the who is the director of the veterinary division, he decided to go back to Auburn. He wanted to go back to college. So I was in the position. They said, okay, you move up, you're now director of technical services. So I became that, and then I had a friend that was in charge of the international, so I ended up as the assistant director of the Pfizer International Veterinary Agricultural Division. Wow. So, and then I left there for money and went and worked for American Home Products. And, that was my course in New York. Path. And after going through a couple of snowstorms, nothing of what they had this year, I said, well, what happened is our American Home and Pfizer were both on the east side of New York. And I'd walk over from there to the Port Authority to get home. And one day I'm walking down and somebody steals a car out of one of the parking lots. And some idiot policeman, I think it was part of the Port Authority police, takes out a gun. Now this is 5:20 in the afternoon, and he's firing at this car, and I'm walking on one side of the road, the car is parallel to me on the other. Goodness. I said, God, if I was on the other side, I would have been run over. And the policeman is firing the gun, and he hit the tires, and the guy crosses 8th Avenue, 5:20 in the afternoon, spins the car around, jumps out of the car and runs down to a subway station, which was down the next block. And I got home, I said, Harry, we're going back to Florida. I said, when they start shooting in the city of New York, I'm getting out. I said, that's for me. So we sold the house, and we just went back, turned around and came back to Florida.
How many children have you got?
Huh?
How many children do you have?
I've got two, and they've got, what we got, 3, 4. We had 5. One we don't talk about, so we got four grandsons now. Right. And wonderful. One. And we've got, well, with this, we'll have 3 great-grands. Wow, that's great. Noah and granddaughter 1 and 2. Right. I don't know what their names are. We'll know Thursday.
You'll know. When did you start teaching history on cruise ships? When was that?
When I retired. Well, you know, I'll never forget one of my cohorts. In fact, she was my first love, and we were in the 6th grade together. Right. So I knew her a long time, and she was an instructor over at FCCJ as well. She taught, I think, literature or something like that. And I had always had a fascination with anthropology and all like that. And in fact, when I was at that particular time, I was the department chair of the science department, and they wanted to offer a honors course of anthropology at my campus. So they asked me, would I teach out of there? Well, I'd done, enough travel, and I said, yeah, I'll put a class together. And I loved it. It was, first of all, there was about 15 students. They were all honor students, so you weren't dealing with, people that really were taking it for a CRIP course or something like that. And I got interested in their program, in the program, just dealing with them. Right. And their story, the first thing I started out with them is I said, every one of you've got to do a genealogy chart. Genealogical is very important, and you have to know your family. So I said, that's your project for the term. So everybody came in. Some of them were really good. Some of them, it's strange that they could go back maybe they knew their parents, their grandparents, and maybe they would know their great-grandparents. But beyond that, they had no idea what their family. So it was really a challenge for them to go back and try to pick up as much. One young lady was fascinating because her ancestor had come over with William the Conqueror in 1066. So he was given some, I wouldn't swear to it, but I thought it was Tunbridge Wells, right, which is down in the south. Yep. I'm sure you're from. Right. And I think that was their estate, right, with this family. Wow. And the greatest thing about it was that there has been in her family, their name when they came to England with William was Wingfield. That was the Norman name. And then they changed it to Winfield. And from 1066 until, the class, right, there has never not been a male heir. Wow. So the name has lasted over 1,000 years. That's amazing. With at least one male heir to the family, which is really, that's the amazing thing. And the other half of her family was her mother's side, and her mother's ancestors lived in New Haven, Connecticut, and they had a big farm. Right. And supposedly that farm ended up as Yale College. Whoever started, right, the divinity school wanted the land, and the family agreed to let them have. Well, they sold it. She wasn't fair. So she was a grande dame on the mother's side, and then the Norman explorer on the other side. But it was a fascinating thing. And then another one, she had one of her ancestors sign the Magna Carta, and another one of them got beheaded in the Tower of London. So that was that family. Wow. But the best one was one individual. His ancestor was a moonshiner in West Virginia, and he got hung. So we had a variety of individuals, but and then it was great because I took them to St. Augustine. We were able to get into a dig there. Then we did also a dig in Jacksonville Beach. Somebody had found some artifacts, and we looked at it, and it was from the Timucuan Indians. So because they were it was on the beach side of Jacksonville, across the intercoastal, and they allowed us to dig in. They said the only thing is when you're finished, make sure you put the dirt back in. But the class had an opportunity, and they found artifacts, pottery and such of that. And the Timucuan was very interesting because their pottery had designs on it. What they would do would take corn cob, and when they had the pot, in the clay, they would rub the corn cob over so they had like crisscross of the cob marking the pottery.
That's wonderful.
So, it was exciting to do that. And then from there, when I retired from college, then one day we were on a cruise or something, and the cruise we were on, somebody was giving a lecture. I think it was on NCL. So I said, you know, I could do that. So I walked up to him. I said, how do you get, I'd like to be interested in doing this. So they said, fine. They gave me the contact that they use, because you had to get work through an agent. Yeah. So I wrote to people and I said, I'm retired from college and I could, you know, talk on anything. So they said, okay, we have a position if you can talk on the Mayan. And we have a ship, I think it was NCL going out of Galveston, or Houston, one of them. And if you would take that, you could go and lecture. I said, great. So my wife said, what do you know about the Mayan? I said, I don't know anything about the Mayan. I didn't even know that there were Mayan around, I'll be honest with you. But, you know, God bless the internet. And so I did everything I had to do. And if anything else, I'm a proverbial liar. And my first question to the group was, how many people have ever been, you know, to visit the Mayan sites? Nobody raised their hand. I said, great, because I can tell you anything, you'll believe me when I tell you. So they said, yeah. So anyway, that's how I got started with it. And I got a very good report on my first. So apparently another company, which was bigger than what I had heard about me, and they contacted me, would I be interested in doing lectures? Because they got paid from the cruise. You as an individual can't write the cruise to get a job. You'd have to work through whatever agency. So the agency would place you on the ships. So after that, Harry and I, we've been on, I think, 107 cruises so far, but I lectured on about 50 of them. And predominantly it was a celebrity. I liked them. And I did, on the Western Caribbean, I would do the Mayan civilization, and then Eastern Caribbean was the Indians of the Caribbean and Columbus. Then we did Europe. I did the Baltic, and I'd do Russia and the Tsars and all like that. And then in the Mediterranean, Greece, Israel, and Egypt. And
you saw a lot of places.
Yeah, and then we'd usually go out of Barcelona or Rome. And so if I went through Rome, then I'd do Pompeii and Venice and Rome, ancient Pompeii, and then go into there. The longest we were out 37 days. We took a transatlantic, which was 2 weeks, and then we spent another 3 weeks in the Mediterranean. So we did like 3 trips around.
That's wonderful.
So it was great. It really was. And as I say, I love to talk, and they like to listen. Harriet always jokes about it. There was one, she gets the story wrong every time, but I don't correct her because that's the wrong thing to do. Anyway, I was talking, this was, I think, one of the trips out of Galveston that we went, Houston, wherever. And we went to the Mayan, and I told him, I said, now when you get into the Yucatan, you're going to see that there's no surface water. In other words, most of their fresh water were either from cenotes, which were wells that they dug, or underground rivers that they were able, the Mayan would get their fresh water that way. So, you know, that was the end of the story. You know, when you're going on a tour, and if you ride by, you're rarely going to find any lakes or anything like that. So after I had another lecture a day or so, and the guy comes back up, he said, you know something? He said, I listened to your lecture, and I didn't believe a word you said. He said, I virtually watched out the window the whole time we were doing the tour. And you're right, there's not one, we never passed one lake or one river or anything in this whole area. So thank God I was correct. So he said, you can tell me anything now and I'll believe you. I said, okay, that's great. But, you know, I knew my work, and I never lied about it, but it was very enjoyable.
Oh, I can imagine.
We did that from 1998, I think was the first. And after 2013, I just kind of gave up on it.
you have done a lot of collecting family history, but before we go into that, can you just tell us a few words about, because we're here partnering with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Can you tell us something about Sam Proctor? You knew him.
Oh, Sam? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was always if I ever had to be anybody, I would have liked to have been Sam. And,
Was he in TAP or was he in the Boys? Was he in TAP?
Yeah,
Was he in the Boy Scouts?
actually he was not. No, well, he was older than
He was
I
older,
am.
okay.
I was his next to last son or brother was my son.
Oh, okay. Okay, Saul.
And Irving was the baby.
Who was married to Rochelle?
Saul. was.
Saul, okay.
Okay. So he was if I ever were to be anybody, I always admired him in that way. Older, obviously. And I was already at TAP, and Sam graduated from Florida, and he was in the history department. And he never went, his brothers now were Pi Lam.
Right.
But they never invited him. And some of the fraternity brothers liked him, and they were in classes with him, and they asked him, would he become an honorary member of our fraternity? So he actually went through the initiation. He didn't get any of the hazing, but he accepted the honor of being an honorary TAP.
Right.
So he was, and he ended up actually as more or less the faculty advisor for. And after he passed away, I think the fraternity has gone downhill ever since he left. But I mean, that was our relationship.
Yeah.
But when we first moved to Jacksonville, now you talk about a ghetto, we lived in Riverside. Mm-hmm. And at one time we counted, and there had to have been, they lived on West Street, we lived on Delwood. There was Myra, Delwood, West Acosta, and Ernest Street. There had to have been 40 or more Jewish families within about a 6-block radius. I mean, the bulk of the middle-class Jewish families lived in this one area.
Right.
You could go down 3 or 4 streets and not find a Jewish rare. But I mean, in some of the more prominent families, the Margot family was very prominent. They lived there. The Leitman family was another large. I mean, while they were still in the 1940s,
Right.
This is where they picked to live. And that really was the Jewish area of Riverside.
Right.
And predominantly they were all members of the center. I don't think we had any Temple members. Temple members lived at like Murray Hill in the more exclusive areas. But the center members all lived in this cluster of homes. So
We should really drive out there like we did in La Villa and just start writing down addresses and people's
yeah, I
names.
mean, I could virtually. It was funny when
We should do that.
We did it, and in fact, we did it with Pearlie, my dad's youngest sister. What was it?
Yeah, Pearlie.
No,
Kramer.
the lady that wanted to do us at the
Goldie? No. Which one?
at the movie
Irish.
house. What was her name?
Oh, Rita Reagan.
Rita Reagan.
Now we're bringing in Norman Studios. We're bringing Hollywood used to be based in Jacksonville.
You know,
Oh, right.
yeah.
Prohibition.
Or, had you ever heard of that?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, actually, Jacksonville was, before Hollywood, the premier movie capital of the world.
Wow. Really?
And
Because of the weather.
well into the teens, and apparently what happened was that, had nothing to do with this, but apparently there was a blue law in Florida and in Jacksonville, so they couldn't sell liquor on there. And so that was one of the limitations that the stars wanted to drink.
Right.
Secondly, was the auto races around the town, and they got very upset with the clamor. They didn't like the people that were associated with it. So they virtually gave up the movie industry.
And Jacksonville said goodbye.
And they all left there and went.
African-American
Now,
filming also.
Hollywood may have been in existence, but Jacksonville really played a major role in the early movies. And Norman Studios was one of those
It's still
places.
standing.
Still there?
Yes, and the buildings are
But
still standing.
at the time with Rita Reagan, her intent was when the center moved from where 3rd and Silver to San Jose, Rita Reagan was the president or something with the Springfield Preservation. So, and they wanted to get the center to turn it into a museum for the Jewish half, the early people of the faith to be there. And also because it was close to the state health department where Jacksonville was the place where all the, so they had the medical area, the Christian portion of Springfield, and then predominant people that lived in La Villa moved to Springfield. That was their transition. And so the attempt was to get as much information and present it where the building was being used by one of the government agencies, I think, for training incorrigibles or whatever, you know, whatever the situation. So she asked me if I, in fact, Stacey, you didn't go with this young girl, but we took my aunt, the youngest one, in the car and with Rita, and Pearlie she knew every house where a Jewish family, because they wanted to identify which houses in Springfield were the Jewish family.
Right.
We just drove down one street, up the street, down the street, and this one lived here, that one lived there, that one lived there. And she knew every single one of them. God bless her.
Wow.
But it never came to fruition, so that was the end of the attempt. And then unfortunately the building burned down.
Under
So that,
suspicious.
Oh my goodness.
that ended any chance to, but it would have been a beautiful building
Right.
to make a museum out of.
Right.
And I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I think, well, they did. They had the stained glass windows in there, which were the original windows from the church, the temple, B'nai Israel. That was the first Orthodox congregation in Jacksonville. Were in the center. They used they took it out of the windows in the LaVille Synagogue.
And so, and circling back to the Proctors, they lived in that area too in Springfield?
We lived on Delwood Avenue, and the Proctors lived right around. We were 4 houses down.
Right.
Three of the four houses were Jewish. The Marks lived on the corner. That was Dr. Bertie Marks. Dora Bryan lived third. There was a non-Jew lived, and then the Proctors.
Right.
And then across the street was a Jewish family. Next to us was a Jewish family. 2 doors down was a Jewish family. Then on the other street was a Jewish family. Bernie, I don't know if you know Judge Nachman. He was one of the judges in Jackson. He lived on the corner, and then another Jewish family were the Metzes. They lived down the street. Then the Harrises lived, and the Rosenbergs. You could go down and you knew every single one of them along the line.
What else? So let's get back then to, so you also have had a great interest in preserving your family history and researching your family history. You tell us something about that?
Yeah, I think I got it by default.
Okay.
To be honest with you, we started in 1970, 71.
Right.
And I know because it was my son's bar mitzvah date. And 2 of my dad's first cousins decided that it's time that the family unite, because there were five brothers and 2 sisters of my grandparents' generation. All 7 were in Jacksonville, and they had, I'd say, between the 7 families, my grandparents had 12 children. The rest of them were 4, 3, 2, whatever. I think there were 35 nieces and nephews, so that would have been from my grandparents' first generation. These would be the second generation. And so they said, it's time that the family should have a reunion.
Yeah.
So in 1971, and as I said, it was my son's bar mitzvah, Edwin Safer, who, blessed memory, was the instigator of it. He came, he says, Mary, since you're inviting the family to the bar mitzvah, why don't we start with that, since you already fixed it. My mother was the caterer, so she would be cooking all the food. It would be good to start a reunion. So you'll invite everybody from the family for the Saturday night affair, and then Sunday night we'll have a dinner at one of the hotels. And that was in 1971. Mm-hmm. Well, we had a great crowd. In fact, Judge Louis Safer was one of the last of the first generation cousins, and he was here at the University of Florida. He was president of the University of Florida. Okay. He was Blue Key at the University of Florida, and he was, I think, a circuit judge at Jackson. So he's well known. And he wrote one of the poems that was given on that first night. And we still have it.
It's here.
It's in the collection.
There. So that's how it started.
Right.
And so virtually everybody said it was great. And I think at the time we may have had, the family may have been about 400, 300 and 400. We had about 150 people come to it. And they came from, predominantly, they all lived in Florida, so it was very easy. And then the next year was another, we were in Miami. Third year, I think we might have been in St. Augustine. So we varied where the places were. Predominantly Florida. We had one in Washington. We had one in Atlanta. We had two in Israel. And so for 25 years, we met every year.
Right. It's amazing.
And the whole family was, well, as I said, it was up to close to now about 900. I think in 1994 was our last year that we did it, and I think we counted over 700 members. Now, these were deceased, but the extended family, there were that many people involved with the family. And it was great, and the last one we did was the tour of Jacksonville, to bring everybody into it, which was probably the best of all of them because everybody was so excited. Because to be honest with you, most of them, their parents or grandparents were born there, but they had never been back. Yeah. They never knew where their ancestors lived in the city, so they really had an opportunity. And the cutest thing, is, obviously it's in the book that you've got, the cutest thing is, after we took the pictures and we went through La Villa, they tore down La Villa. So we had the archival pictures of La Villa, of most of the house, not all of them, but I mean where our family lived, were all destroyed except for my grandparents' home, which became a national, and his sister that lived right around the corner. That was the Whittons, and they had a duplex. Yeah. So those are the only three houses that remained from the original La Villa. Everything else was level. And and our pictures were the last to be taken of those. So if anybody's going to write a book on La Villa, I can give them some of those pictures to show.
One thing that I love about the Safer collection that's in our library is not just the contents, which are in themselves wonderful and fascinating, but also the fact that they're accompanied by two books that you put together with Stacey. You both went back to Lithuania and did the research. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, we did that, 94?
95.
That was before Jeffrey was born.
Yeah.
We went, and the four of us, and we ended up, what was it, a Fiat or something. Five of us, six, including the big man that sat in the front.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about him.
Yeah. And we all fit in this one car. Now the car, thank God for Bruce, we used clothes hanger to work out with the spark plugs because something went wrong with the car. But anyway, we toured and the one place we didn't go to was
Beers.
Bears,
Right.
which we wanted to do, but this guy we had to pick up was so obnoxious, and we didn't understand him anyway. So finally I said, let's forget Bears. That's the one. We never got back to it. But we visited Pontevish, where the family was. My great-grandfather was buried there. Where the Jewish cemetery was in Pontevish, the Russians, not the Germans, but the Russians leveled it
Right.
and took the stones and used them for streets or something like that. And they turned it into a park. And there was a marker on a stone that said this was the Jewish cemetery.
Right.
And so that was that indication. And then from Pontevish, we went to Pushalot, which a lot of the Jews, we went into the cemetery there, and we saw some of the Jews that I recognized the name that were actually residents, or their ancestors were in the cemetery in Pushalot. And then we went to Pecroy, where my dad and my uncle were born. And it was fascinating because we met our guide obviously was Lithuanian, so she could talk to him. And the elderly lady that lived in the house said she remembers when the Jewish people lived, because it was part of, I guess, the shtetl, because
Right.
the synagogue was there. And I looked, because I've got a picture of because when my grandfather got there, he was I think he said he was the rabbi, but he may have just have been the cantor, the moil, and the shechet. And there was a store at the end of the lane, and it still had the kosher, Hebrew sign on the building.
Wow.
None of the Jews lived there. I think they left in about 1932. And unfortunately, the synagogue, which he was part of, somebody set it on fire in 2009. They didn't destroy the whole building, they've recovered. They've replaced the wood and stuff, because it was one of the last wooden synagogues in Lithuania, because all of them had been destroyed. And this one here had already been identified by the Lithuanian government as a national archives type of thing.
Right.
Somebody set it on fire. And I had a picture of how they burned it. It burned out the one wall, and but they've replaced
restored
it.
it.
So we don't know which house. I just picked a house. There was nowhere. I said that's where my father was born. My grandmother had 12 children. I said, now my grandson's wife, she's got 2 doctors, and she has to go all the time to them, and she's having twins, so I guess one doctor delivers one twin, the other doctor delivers the other twin, or whatever. That'll be Thursday. My grandmother had 12 children, and she probably never even saw a doctor. And all of them, and she had twins too on top of it. And she got up and probably cooked the Shabbos meal.
Right, right.
So,
You took a lot of photographs of your trip as well, didn't you?
And it was great. I mean, it really was an experience of being there and actually having the opportunity. And on top of that, we had this, our archivist that went in at a cost, but it was worth it. And we ended up with close to 100 documents.
Right.
Our family and extended family. See, just any of the Bobbitt family, which was our family name, and the Safer, she just gathered that group. But I ended up with my grandparents' birth certificate, their marriage certificate, and the birth certificates of copies of them.
Yep.
The birth certificate of the 4 of the children that were born in Lithuania. And
Including the doctor who we mentioned earlier.
Right, right. That's
and my grandparents' marriage certificate, and everything was written in, it was interesting, it was written both in Russian and Yiddish, and I think it may have been either Lithuanian or
Right,
well,
right.
they used Russian.
Right.
So it was written in 2 or 3 languages like that. And you
Yes,
have
we have
copies
them.
of all
Yes.
of those.
They're amazing.
So we were able, and that's really how we were able to identify most of our family. The unfortunate part, we don't know how many of them survived because we don't know anybody that left other than my parents. We've never ran into anybody that said, okay, we were from that village or, part of the family. That's why I was wondering on the Yiska books whether any of them were in there. So we've never really pursued to see whatever happened with them. But we have their names and, if we live long enough, maybe we'll either go back or we'll find a Yiska book on the on bears.
It's complicated tracing that history, and you've done amazing work with that.
Interesting. I have been, again, like I used to tell them, I could lie about anything, but based on the names and the historically Jews named after their deceased relatives, so we were able to identify. We had the knowledge of who the great-great-grandfather was, and his name was Benjamin. He was born about 1805, and that was predicated on we knew our great-grandparents because we had their documents, and I think we have a picture of his tombstone. So we knew him, and we knew because he was known as Joseph Schrager ben Benjamin, so his father's name was Benjamin. So, Joseph Schrager was born in 1839. So we knew 1839, and his father was born around 1805. Now, the children that were siblings of Benjamin, everyone in there had a relative that was named Fivish. And Fivish is interesting because Fivish that's Yiddish, but in Aramaic is Shraga. Shraga is Aramaic for Fivish. And this is how you talk about stories that come about. Rabbi Perry explained to me that the name Shraga was given to a person born who was an orphan. In other words, that the mother may have died in childbirth, and the term Fivish or there was given to that child in memory of the mother. So if that were the case, then if Benjamin's father was Fivish, then that meant that all of these that had been named, and my great-grandfather was named Joseph Schrager. So on some of the documents it was Joseph Schrager, some of it was just Fivish, the Bubbas. So they used the Fivish in the Yiddish part. So we just assumed that the ancestor had to have been either Joseph Fivish, Joseph Schrager, or something like that. And based on the fact that the great-great-grandfather was born around 1805, then we just assumed that his father was born somewhere around 1780. So we said, okay, here's our ancestor, and then that's where it was. So now it came to the name. The name was the Bubbas. So one of one of the brothers of my dad's brother, he said that's because Fivish was Joseph Schrager, and what would it be? The Bubbas was that you would go to be with the Bubby. So the grandmother take care of the children, and therefore they took the name the Bubbas, or the Bubby. Okay, so everybody believed that. I said, okay, that's good. And everybody liked the idea, and okay. I searching it out because I had my DNA done, and all of a sudden I see that my DNA showed that I have some Sephardic blood in it. That somewhere in my generation they came out of Morocco. So I said, okay, if they came out of Morocco, that meant they had to have gone to Spain. And they probably were in Spain until 1492. Fortunately, there is a town near Avila, that is called Bubbas, B-O-B-E-S. So now, if Bubas is a town in Spain and we have Sephardic blood, the likelihood is in 1492, because Avila was closer to the Pyrenees,
Right.
and probably the exile would have been, instead of going south, they went north.
Yeah.
And so when you got to Lithuania, what's your name? De Bubas. I'm from Bubas in Spain. So that's my logic of how we got the name De Bubas.
That's great detective work.
But I mean, and since nobody else can deny
Right.
it,
You're sticking with it.
it is now the gospel of the family. So we're not only not Ashkenazi, but
Right.
we are Sephardic, and we came from Spain, and we were there in 1492.
I like it.
Now, if you don't believe me, then go to
Find the
somebody else. Right.
That's
Talk to
wonderful.
Ferdinand and Isabella about that.
Yes. Well, talking to you today, there have been so many amazing things that you've done and achieved. What for you, though, is the accomplishment of which you're most proud?
Nothing.
No.
You know, I've just had a good life.
Right.
And I've never been afraid to adventure out from it. I mean, I've done enough things. I'll never forget my mother, because I really never wanted to go. My dad had the butcher market, so my goal was to go into the market with work for my father.
Yeah.
And my mother said, no, your father got to the 4th grade, and I got to the 8th grade, you're going to college. I said, Ma, I don't want to go to college. I don't need to go to college. I can work in the kosher market. No, she said, I don't care if you come out as a garbage man, but you're going to get a degree. And you could be a garbage collector, but you're going to be a garbage collector with a degree. I said, okay, so I went to college. But, and that was it. In other words, and if everybody said, how many jobs have you? Well, let me back up. How many places have you lived? And my wife keeps account of that.
Right.
I think it's 38 or 39 times we've moved. Right. We've been married. It'll be, if she didn't kill me or I don't kill her, we'll be married 61 years come November. I got to remember when it was. But in that time, I think it's 39 or 40 times. She keeps the list of it. So she said, how can you move that many times? I said, well, that way I never had to pay, and I never had to find bills that were coming due, so I just moved to another place. But most of our moves were, you know, locally. Yeah. We've lived out at Jacksonville Beach, I think, 4 or 5 times. We keep moving in and out and in and out. But I told them this last move there. But I've done everything that I've, in my lifetime. I mean, you know, I look at a friend of mine who I've known him since we were in the 5th grade, and we went through public school together. We roomed together as a tap. And we've been friends we used to joke that we were friends longer than most people stayed married. Unfortunately, now he got partial dementia, but he still remembers me, and I mean, we still talk and all like that. But he was a pharmacist, and he graduated from pharmacy school here. And he stayed a pharmacist. I mean, he had one job, and he stayed in it for 30, 40 years. He worked at the hospital. He worked mostly in hospital. He never had a drugstore on his own. And that was his life. I mean, you know, you go to work, come home from work and all that. I couldn't take it. I mean, I had this is my resume. I had a farm. I was a chicken farmer, okay? Then I went to school. I became a veterinarian. I didn't like that. Then I decided I would go back to school and become a professor. Well, I went, it got cold in Iowa, so I said, I ain't staying here. Then I worked with the ASPCA. Then I was in industry at Pfizer. And the greatest thing is, I always was, part of the experience, I was good. I knew what I was doing. In fact, I laugh because I've saved a lot of the articles. Mm-hmm. And when I was, particularly at Pfizer, when I was director of tech services, I had, I forgot, it was 6 or 7 PhDs in nutrition, and I had about 12 veterinarians that I was in charge of. But I would be the one that they would sit down if we were promoting a product. I would have to go out and talk with the customers, and I traveled along. I went to nearly every state in the union, and I'd always be able to sell it. And it was the article that I got. Our vice president of marketing there said, "Why can't the rest of you be like Ed? Because he could sell anything." And you have all the information. Why don't you go out and sell the product? But I was good at what I liked to do, and I enjoyed it. I like to kibitz, like you're making me kibitz with you. And the only thing is, you got to learn to tell me shut up. You've already talked too long. So I did that. Then we gave that up. After about 9 years, I said, I lost my dad and my mother was here. So I said, let's go back to Florida. And my wife said, you want to go back? We'll go. The kids, I liked where they were in school, but I didn't want them staying up there. And so we came back and we went to Orlando, and I opened up a dinette store. We sold dinette furniture for about 2 years. Wow. So then my father-in-law passed away, and my mother-in-law was alone. My wife's brother lived down there, but she wanted to go down and stay with her mother, because her mother was not frail, but she wanted to be. I said, okay. So we sold our dinette business, and now I became a junk man. So my father-in-law owned the scrap metal, so I went into the scrap metal business, and I was there for about 3 years. Then the brother-in-law, he settled the estate, and my wife said, well, I don't want you to stay in, because I know you don't like it. It didn't matter to me. I was working, and I'd do anything. You want me to sell junk, I'll sell junk. So now, what I was going to do, I said, okay, I was about 50. I said, I'll go work for Merrill Lynch. So I went in to the Merrill Lynch office in Fort Myers, and he said, you want to be a broker? I said, yeah, I can do that. I didn't know gornies about being a stockbroker. So they interviewed me. They said, okay, that's good. So I went to New York, passed all my tests, and came back, and I was now a stockbroker with Merrill Lynch. The greatest thing I remember, I don't know if they still do it, but anyway, at that time it was the office, and you had the phone calls. So whoever called, if that was your day on the phone, whoever called, if you got an order, fine. If you didn't, and you had your own customer. I get a call, and the guy was, I'll never forget, he was up in Buffalo or something like that. He says, and Merrill Lynch at the time had some kind of like a bond package. He says, I want to buy $100,000 of this particular bond. $100,000. I said, oh my God, I'm going to take an order. I'm going to get stuck with $100,000. So I said, just a moment. So I went to the manager. I said, what do I do? He said, well, tell him to go by the Buffalo office of Merrill Lynch and put, say, $5,000, $10,000 deposit, and that would cover, if he breaks the contract, at least that would cover the. I said, okay. So I said, you'll do that? Yeah, he'd do it. So now I sold $100,000 to one person. And I come out, I made a $2,900 commission on that one sale. I said, hey, that's great. I never met the man. I never saw him again. And I said, thank God, I'm through with that. So anyway, I stayed there. And then I decided I want to come back to Jacksonville, because the family was all up here. And we moved back to Jacksonville, and that was in '79. And I was with Merrill Lynch, and I really didn't like it. Again, something that I did, I enjoyed it, but now it's time to move on. So I now decided, in the meantime, I became, I was friend, when I was in practice, I worked for this veterinarian, and he was in charge of the dog track. The track had to have a veterinarian, so I said, okay, I'll go out there and be the track vet. So I got that job. So then I decided, I'd like to teach, because I don't know what you got. So I went to a cousin of mine. He just recently, we had his unveiling yesterday, in fact. He was a teacher at FCCJ, So he introduced me to somebody in the science department. So they said, well, he was at North Campus. He said, well, we can't use it here, but go to this other campus. I went there and they needed an instructor for anatomy physiology. So I said, okay, I can do that. He said, well, what do you know about human anatomy? Because it's for pre-nursing. I said, look, I'm a veterinarian, but I had to learn physiology on 5 different animal species. I think I can teach one. So they said, that's reasonable. So now I'm a veterinarian teaching human anatomy and physiology. And fortunately, I was really the best anatomy and physiology. In fact, it was so good that they videotaped all of my lectures. I had 2 classes. So I taught anatomy 1 and anatomy 2. And the campus had all of my lectures put on tape. And the other, the North Campus, which was where the nursing program was, actually got copies of it so their students up there could take it. But it was so funny because when it came time to test them, you go into the library at the college, every machine had my picture on it. So you could walk through there, and every lecture was on one of the machines that they were listening to the lecture over again. And we had to dissect, so the first thing we had at that time, we had to dissect cats. So the first thing my students say, well, that looked like my cat. Did you steal my cat? I don't know what happened to my cat and all like that. I said, I ain't going through this every year with the cats. So I told them, from now on, we ain't getting cats. We're going to use fetal pigs. I said, nobody's got a fetal pig for a pet. So we ended up having fetal pigs for dissection. And so I said, to make it interesting, we're going to have a fetal pig society, which I established. In the fetal pig society, if you made 100 on the anatomy test, on the dissection, you could join the fetal pig society. So everybody, their drive was to become a member of the fetal pig society. Well, the funniest thing, one of my students, God bless her, one year, she was already out of the class. I come into the classroom and she had a ceramic pig. And I jumped back and I said, oh my God, who took the pig out of the vat? And I looked up and I was, and under him she says, to the Dr. Ed Fetal Pig Society. So I'm like, a beautiful fetal look of a fetal pig.
Like it.
So, and I taught there till I was 14 years old, and then I was department chair. I enjoyed it. I was president of Faculty Senate, and I was talking to one of the faculty that's there now. I said, the funniest thing is, and I don't know how I did it, but when I was president, we were in, like everything in university life, you're always looking to help get your, we didn't have a union, so we were non-union campus or non-union teachers. So you had to negotiate your contract. Somehow or another, they had not gotten a raise for a year or 2, and I'm the negotiator. And I ended up getting a 10% raise for across the campus for the faculty. Well, I was already God. I mean, who in the world ever heard of a 10% raise? I mean, if you got a 3% raise, and here I'm coming up, because we hadn't gotten a raise about 2 or 3 years. So I ended up with the 10. So naturally, I got reelected president for the next term.
The pressure was on.
And then that's where I say, and I enjoyed it. I told Stacey, if I ever come back in another life, that's what I wanted to do. Because of all the things that I did, I always enjoyed the teaching. And after 13 years, I think it was 13 or 14 years, I said to myself, you know, I'm tired. I'm tired of listening to myself say the same thing every day, you know, the same subject. So I said, that's it. I'm tired. I'm ready to retire. I think I'm like Walter Mitty. You remember the movie?
I remember.
He could do anything,
Yeah,
and it was just in your imagination. Whatever you wanted to do, you're capable of doing.
You've even been Pharaoh.
And I was Pharaoh. No, I was Moses.
You were
yeah.
Moses, excuse
Your
me. I'm
husband
sorry.
was
That's right.
Pharaoh.
Bruce was Pharaoh. One
This
of
is what the
satyrs.
Safer plays.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so I can say that in my 89, or if I make it till June, in my 89 years, I've done what I've wanted to do,
Right.
and I've enjoyed every minute of it. I mean, I can't say, and I didn't stay long enough where I insulted anybody or made anybody mad at me, so I got out just in time to say, hey, it was a great life, and bye.
That's wonderful.
I mean, that's the only way you could enjoy life. I mean, you know, why? If you're not happy with what you're doing, don't stay in that, you know.
Yeah. So I would ask you, here you are today. How is the world different today? How do you see it today from
Horrible.
from when you were younger?
We were talking. We had such a. To me now, as I said, from a personal standpoint, we lived in a very peaceful environment. I mean, we never. You never locked the doors to your house. The cars were never locked. In fact, you'd leave the keys in the cars, and that's the life we grew up with. Today, I just can't even watch the news anymore, because as soon as you turn on, you have at least 4 people murdered on the streets, or somebody's just, well, this Waffle House, the guy goes in naked, shoots up 4 people, and just for whatever the reason, or at the parkland, at the schools, you know, where's the people's, the life today? I'll say one thing. Thank God I'm on the way out, not in, because of the fact that it ain't the same.
Right.
I mean, we may have had, you know, robberies, and there may have been killings, but like in Jacksonville, I think now they're in the top 5% of murders. Jacksonville is in, you know,
Right.
in a high mark, and every day somebody else gets murdered there or shot there. So the old days were good days. And in fact, I laugh because that's one of my grandfather's sermons, is that
Yes.
remember the days of old, because those were the good days.
Right.
I usually use that to show, because he said, you didn't have anything, but whatever you had, it was yours, and you appreciated it and everything like that. So, and I think growing up in that environment with the family, I mean, and I was an only child, but all of our family was there, and and I was the oldest. I had 2 older cousins that were, they both had passed away. My second, the one next to me, was about 18 years old, and she died of leukemia. And then the eldest one died several years after my father died. But the family, we didn't have cousins. We had brothers and sisters. Nobody was a cousin, and all of my aunts and uncles, they were my family. Yeah. If they say, Edwin, do this, it was done. I mean, it was never, well, you can't tell me what to do.
Right.
You just went ahead and did it.
It was more social cohesion.
It was
family.
your responsibility to listen to them, and there was never a question even. But the family unit was much, much closer. We don't see it today. In fact, I was saying to Stacey that we had this unveiling for one of my cousin's husband.
Right.
And of our family, there were 3 of us that attended. I mean, the family is minimal now,
Right.
but nobody shows up. I mean, he happened to belong to a Chabad group, so that group was there. But family-wise,
Right.
and it was an unveiling. I think at the funeral there may have been more, but I was telling her that the rabbi at there said that, you know, that unveilings are no longer in vogue. In other words, you don't even need it religiously. You know, it's not a religious thing. You have to bury him, you have to sit Shiva, you know, Shalosim the 30 days and all like that. But that's what's missing.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think that's ever going to come back. I don't think there's too much cell phones and computers, put your computer away, you know, and there's too many side things that have happened to the world that the people don't want to become family oriented now. They don't have the time for it.
Do you have then, thinking about where we are today, do you have any words of advice or wisdom to share?
Wisdom?
That's putting you on the spot, isn't it?
My advice is just have a good time in your lifetime. What is it? There's somebody say you're only here a very short time. And enjoy everything, every minute, and enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think if people like Stacey got so many irons that she's working, but she enjoys it, right?
Yes.
And that's the way you have to be. As I say, I'll go back to my friend who's a pharmacist. You could ask him, what have you done in your lifetime? I was a pharmacist. And that's what many of them. I was a CPA. I was a lawyer. Well, did you ever go hiking, or, did you ever just think about being a camp counselor? The things that are fun things to do.
Yeah.
And most of them say, no, not really. I didn't have time for it because I had to do this, that, or the other.
Too busy working.
And I think that if we ever get back around to there, I think you're going, but it'll never happen, and not in this lifetime anyway. And because I think our whole society has changed, and there's really, and I don't think there's any place in the world. I mean, you could go to the Orient, you can go to Israel, you go to Europe. I mean, the generation is such that it's me generation, and forget about everybody. The only ones I think that, I don't know if they still do, and we always admire were the Chinese. They always, in fact, Harry and I, we were talking about, we saw somebody who was on television. She said, that's the only thing. The Chinese always took care of their aged. Right. I said, I took care of my mother. She said, that's different. But the Chinese, you didn't move in with your mother. In fact, she had to stay with us for 2 weeks, and she said after 2 weeks, you ran out of the house. So, but that's, I mean, I did love my mother, so I love my father too. But that's it. So enjoy what you're doing. And when you're tired of doing it, find something else you'll enjoy and do that too. That's
beautiful, thank you. So that's my questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to share that we might have missed? Or?
Cool, I don't know. Well, I've got so many, I don't think there's enough tape to cover.
There really isn't. There really isn't.
It was good. As I said,
I think we captured a lot, actually.
And I enjoy looking at my memorabilia because
you've brought them with you. We'll take some photographs.
I was elected faculty. I had a great time. I was selected as a faculty member of the year, and I had to put together a book, and I never realized the things that I'd done at the college. That I'd instituted as part of while I was there, because besides being faculty Senate president, I set up, or I was working with other people, where we set up a program for the faculty where they could go to an area, take a class out of discipline. Right. And at that time, the college would pay for it. So they would, you'd pick out a site, and they would apply for it, and they would be able, they'd get approved. Maybe we'd send 3 or 4. And that's how I really got involved with the Mayan, because I went down to Merida, to the university in Merida, and got so fascinated with what they had and what they were saying. And then I went on tour in the area, and so I'd set up this program for my colleagues in the college. So we sent a group to Merida. Yeah. Then we sent a group to Mount St. Helens on volcanology. Mm-hmm. Now, you couldn't be a science. You could be a math teacher, and you could go to volcanology. Wow. If you were an English teacher, you could go to space camp. In other words, you could not go into an area where that was your profession. Right. You had to learn something different and enjoy it. Fantastic. And after I went to Merida just to set up the program there, but near the end of my tenure, I decided I wanted to go to space camp. Right. And I graduated from space camp. I had my astronaut uniform. I kind of outgrew it, but I saved my badge, and Dr. Edwin Safer with the pilot's insignia on it. Loved it. It was great, and it was an experience. And everybody that went there really enjoyed. It was actually we went with the space camp for adults, and mainly for teachers. You know, so if you were a high school teacher, you could go back and teach the program to your students to get them interested in space and in astronomy and what have you. And so we went down there, and we were there for close to 2 weeks, and we all graduated. We built little space rockets and we blasted them all. The cutest, one story brings another story, right? We were sitting, they have or they did, I think they closed up the space camp in Canaveral there in Huntsville now. But they had a mock-up of a shuttle.
Right.
So I was a payload specialist, so I was floating around, hooking up this thing. But that was one of the jobs. But the other job was, we had a mock-up of the control panels. And there was about 4 or 5 of us sitting. Now we're in our space astronaut jeans or whatever on there, and we're sitting in all these space. Now we're talking to the mock-up and telling them what to do as far as you're in the shuttle, what you need to do. Well, it happened to be the same time that the junior camp was graduating. So we had a lot of parents coming through, and they're seeing us talking, thinking that we're talking to, because about 2 days before that, there was actually a shuttle blast off.
Right.
So they thought we were actually communicating with the spaceship that was up there. And we're talking with this mock-up that's right next to us. And they're taking pictures of us, waving them and all like that. And they're thinking they're really getting pictures of these people running the shuttle up in space.
That's
So it was an exciting adventure to say that we were space cadets. That's what they said about on mine. We're all a bunch of space cadets or something.
And you've recorded all your memories and kept them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I was, like I told, that makes it easier for Stacey to do my eulogy.
So what I get out of what we've talked about today is be curious, do something different, and always record it. Right?
Well, yeah, and fortunately we pretty well with the family. In fact, we've got a lot of the video that we taped while, fortunately we had, video cameras by that time in '72. So we've got many of the reunions that we had. And it's great because you look back at people that are alive and people that are no longer with us, family that are no longer with us. So I was always one, and picture-wise, I always, another story, we were in Egypt, and I loved to take pictures. And we were in Cairo, and we were in the museum. And I have 2 cameras, one I left in the hotel, and one was in the Cairo Museum. And the one that I had, the heat in the museum, well, you were at the synagogue, so I'm sure you went into, they've now moved it. I think they've got one. The new museum is right near the pyramids now in Giza. Well, anyway, we're in the old one. So my camera, the heat, the battery just went dead. So I said, we were at a hotel across the park, whatever the landing part of it there. So I said to Harry, I said, it's hot out there. You stay here and I'll go over, pick up my other camera, bring it back. So I found the guard. I said, I'm leaving my wife in charge. You are in charge of my wife. So make sure she sits here and I'll be coming back. So I left her sitting at the museum, and I went and picked up my other camera, and I came back and I was shooting pictures. But, and fortunately, those are the pictures I used on my trips because I was not that great of a photographer, but it was good enough. And since nobody had been there, I could tell them anything that I wanted to about it. I ended up teaching, I don't know if you're familiar with OLLI. Have anybody been around?
The Ochsner Lifelong Learning Institute.
Oh,
Are you familiar with it?
UNF has.
UNF has this a program where expertise, if you would.
Right.
would go in there and give a program. So I've done, I don't know, 3 or 4 of them. One of them, two of them were on the Mayan, and then one I did with the ancient civilizations. So in it I included Egypt and Israel, and it was like 6 lessons, and then so I had something on Egypt, then the across the desert, and in Israel, that finished up with the life of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And the class, you know, they really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed talking to them and teaching them. And I'd always fill up the class. They'd only have like, I don't know, 26 to 30. But my class was always filled, and they enjoyed the program. So the same thing. I like to share. Anybody wants to listen to me, what is it? I taught anthropology. Genealogy at one time to a group there.
I think your passion for teaching comes across.
Yeah, I liked it. I said, I wish I had started out that way. If Sam would have pushed me further.
It's all Sam's fault. You're going to try to put this on Sam?
We're going to end up with blaming Sam.
Yeah, if you got to blame somebody, blame Sam.
It's a good way to end the oral history interview.
Put the blame on Sam, babe. Put the blame on Sam. That could be a new song. But really, it's funny because, and why I ended up veterinary. The only reason I ended up veterinary medicine because my father was a butcher, and I said, well, that'd be great. I mean, you know, I could take care of the animals and then send it to slaughter so he could, my grandfather could kill them.
Oh, Edwin.
So, but no, I really enjoyed it. As I said, if when I come back for a second time, that I would like to be in history, and I was always fascinated by it. And it's really the only thing I can remember. I mean, you know, strangely enough, I've got a good memory on most things. I think I can remember back to when I was about 3 or 4 years old.
Wow.
Vague, various things.
Well, you've provided a great deal of wonderful material for future historical research.
Okay,
so
well, I'm happy
you.
that we did it all in one session.
We did.
Did we cover
How do we
everything?
do? I think so, yeah.
You got anything left on the tape?
I think we're good most of the time.
How we
Are
do?
you satisfied now?
Are you happy with it?
I'm happy.
I think that's
happy?
great. I think we got some wonderful.
Are you all right with it?
Yes, I love it.
Because you're
Thank
the boss
you.
lady.
Okay.
Only for you would I come and do it. Listen, you don't know how many times I told her, I said, do we really have to do this?
But it was wonderful. It was really wonderful.
Well,
Thank you.
I think you could have picked a lot more experienced
Edwin,
people.
stop.
No.
I'm a kibitzer,
No,
as you know.
you didn't.
But,
You gave us a lot of interesting historical information, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
As long as you're happy, I'm
I am
happy.
happy. Okay, you finished filming? Wonderful.